Hello folks, this is Johnny again, and in today's video I kind of want to talk a little bit about my dynamic range in mixing, in mastering and stuff, because someone asked me about it. How do I approach my dynamic ranges and stuff, and how do I take care of them? Well, I'm gonna break this down into two sections. First in mixing and then in mastering. In mixing, I have to be honest, I don't look too carefully at my numbers and not too carefully at the dynamic range. All I look at is the master channel, fader, the metering, and I want to watch out that the peaks of the drums don't pop out too much and too crazily, because then it can get a bit more difficult in the mastering stage, because when the peaks get too crazy, it's just hard to get them under control without distorting, without pumping, without losing transient detail, and without losing your punch. So I want to get the peaks under control as good as possible in the mixing stage. So the mastering will be a little bit simpler and I don't run into any trouble. Let's just take this, my intro project here again, and just take a look at the meter and see how the peaks are. Yeah, you can see the peaks. They look like they are hitting a wall and they don't go too excessive, and that's due to how I mix my drums. It's the way I use compression, the saturation knob, the J-clip. I said it again, G-clip. There we go. It's G-clip, not J-clip. What the heck is wrong with me? Yeah, also on the room mic, I put a little bit of a limiter so the peaks don't go out of control. And then I still have a little bit of compression and saturation on my master channel. This still belongs to the mixing stage here, okay? That is not a mastering chain. This is a mix bus chain, and all of that contributes to getting the peaks under control. And if I take all of this out, all the stuff that controls peaks, then it might not actually be too much of a difference on the peaks. Let's just check. Yeah, it's first of all, the mix is quieter because this thing right here boosts the volume a little bit while it's saturating, and you can still see the peaks. They don't go too crazy. I guess that's because the saturation knob is just doing its job in keeping the peaks on the kick and snare under control. But in any case, I still do all the stuff just to be safe here. And now let's look at the specific numbers, at our peaks and our average volume. Let's just play it again and see what happens. Okay, so here's the meter for all of that. This is the output meter of Ozone, although the input meter will show the same thing because there is no processing going on here in my master chain. Okay, so what we are seeing is I actually peak pretty high at times. You may hear very often from different forums peak around -6 dB in mixing, so you don't run into trouble. And I'm actually peaking higher. Sometimes it goes up to -1 dB. But there's absolutely no problem in doing that. As long as you're not clipping, you're golden. That's the main issue when you're mixing. Don't clip, because clipping is very bad. As long as you don't clip, it's all good. Even if I'm peaking up to -1 or -0.5 dB, it still doesn't clip, so it's good. And if later on in mastering it's too loud and I don't have enough headroom to play around with, I just lower the volume of the mix, and then I have enough headroom. But bottom line, it's still not clipping, so it's all good. So there's no problem in doing that. And then the average volume was going to, what was it, about between minus 60 and minus 15 dB, around those lines. So let's say I peak around minus 3 dB on average, and the average loudness is at minus 15 dB, then we have a dynamic range of 12 dB. So I guess I'm working with a dynamic range of 12 dB in my mixes, and I did not know that until now. So I learned something new every day. And you may notice I'm not using RMS, I'm using LUFS. It's a different algorithm to measure the average loudness. And as far as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, LUFS is a bit closer to how the human ear actually perceives the loudness. Okay, now let's go to the mastering chain. Let's just turn on the EQ. That one won't really change the dynamic range. And the C4. Oh, that one's still doing everything, okay. Usually nowadays I only use the first band and the multi-band compression just to get the low end under control, and all the rest I keep as it is, but oh well. This is also starting to become an older project for me, because the last few weeks and months I've been tweaking my process quite a bit, and this one was still done before that. So let's check the dynamic range with and without the multiband compressor and see if stuff really happens on the numbers. You do see the average volume coming up a little bit with the multiband compressor, because peaks are getting more under control, so you can raise the average loudness a little bit more. And you also see I'm starting to clip now, but that's only because really of this one here boosted something, so a little bit of the peaks in this 6K area gets accentuated a little bit, so I go into clipping territory, but that will be controlled again later on with the limiter. Okay, and then afterward I again have the saturation knob, and as I showed you in one of these other videos, I use the saturation knob also a lot on my drums, because it nicely keeps the peaks under control while raising the average loudness and making everything sound bigger than life. Yeah, so when I turn this one on and off, the loudness will get obviously higher. So watch out for that when you're listening to headphones. I advise you to perhaps turn down your volume a little bit at this point. Okay, let's check this out without, and then I'll turn it on and back off, and we can look at the meter. Okay, now we see the peaks are hitting this wall at about minus 2.5 dB, and the average loudness comes up like crazy to about minus 11 dB. So our dynamic range is getting quite a bit smaller now. So I already squashed down about 3 or 4 dB in the gain reduction between the mix and the master. And it almost sounds like that's a bad thing, but well, what kind of genre are we working with here? This is heavy metal. You want things to be a a bit more aggressive and keeping that dynamic range a little bit on the low makes things feel more aggressive and more upfront. But of course, we don't want to go overboard. Okay, and after this, wait, here's still equalizer, just filtering some very low subs. And then the master. And when I turn this one on and off, of course, the volume will go up even more. So again, watch out for your volume as you're listening to this. Okay, now we see the peaks are at -1 dB, pretty much consistent, and then the average loudness goes up to -8, -7 dB. So now after mastering, I have a dynamic range of about 6 dB, 6 to 7 dB. And that's pretty good. That's loud enough, definitely. I wouldn't push it any further than that, because then things just start to get lifeless and squashed. And we really don't need to go all too crazy these days with the streaming services normalizing their tracks anyways. So the perceived loudness will pretty much be the same level across the board, no matter what kind of music you listen to. So we don't need to squash things like crazy to stand out. That was a thing of the CD era, but since that's pretty much fading out now, and things are going to online streaming services, that point is pretty much rendered moot. So just for fun, let's switch the reading to RMS. Here, peak and RMS. I want to check what it looks like there. See, the RMS gives me around -6 dB and LUFS rather -7 dB. So it's a bit different, no? And when you check some modern metalcore mixes, you know, those very almost generic sounding sterile kind of mixes, sometimes they can be so squashed the RMS goes up to -4 dB, and I personally think that's just going too far. I always feel that kind of music sounds so lifeless and boring, and it's all because it's so squashed down to inhuman levels. I mean but that's just me. I'm not a big fan of how metalcore sounds these days. In general, I don't mind the style of music at all, but the production, I just can't seem to get into it really. But that's just me. If you like it, that's totally cool. But I personally wouldn't go for that kind of dynamic processing. It's going a little overboard for my taste. So, what else is there to talk about with dynamic ranges? If you have trouble getting your peaks under control in the mix, then check out some of my other secret videos where I talk about the drums, the one about the saturation knob and also about the drum bus processing. There I show you how I do things to really get those dynamics, the punch and the peaks where I want them. Here, specifically the G clip keeps things under control, the saturation knob keeps things under control while adding more fatness and loudness. Yeah, and then in the mix bus channel, a little bit of compression. Those are not going too crazy, just about -1 dB of gain reduction on those. And then the saturation, the tape saturation also does a little bit of catching the peaks. And then this one is just to add a little bit of air up there. Rhyme. And as you can see, my master chain in here is really rudimentary. It's just multiband compressor, and then the saturation knob again, and then limiter, and that's really it. Nowadays I really do more on the mix bus to get the mix more where I want it, which eases up on the master bus, on the master chain quite a bit, and it makes things simpler. It's just a bit of a different mindset, I guess. Well, in any case, that's about everything I can think of to talk about when it comes to dynamic range on my productions. I hope you got something out of it. If not, I'm sorry. But yeah, the main point I'd say of this video is you don't need to squash things like crazy, because streaming services nowadays are normalizing things, so they are at the same average loudness level. And then from there, the peaks that go up from the average loudness, really is more of a matter of taste, how you want to process that. You can either squash it down to get things feeling loud, or you can go a bit easier to keep things more natural sounding. That's up to you. Well, yeah, now I'm starting to ramble on again. See you next time.